Hello, my name is Raina and welcome to the second part of the FAERS dataset analysis video. In the first part, I explained what the FAERS dataset is, loaded the reaction, drug, and the demographics files in R, and from there, I've done data cleaning on each of them. It was quite challenging to deduplicate the demographics file. We faced a difficulty where there wasn't enough information for us to determine whether a person was a duplicate or not. So I came to a conclusion to join all the three files together and then remove duplicates. So this way there's more information combined, meaning we are more certain that we have removed those duplicates more accurately. Okay, so when we look at the drug file, there's still a lot of drugs that are either secondary suspected drug or concomitant drugs. So SS is the secondary suspect and C is concomitant drugs, which means they are not as likely to be the culprit of the side effects listed in the reaction file. So for this analysis, I'm only going to keep the primary suspects simply because they're most likely the ones that cause the side effects, and yeah, the other ones are less important. So that is done in this code. I'm only keeping the primary suspects here. And once that's done, we don't need the roll code column anymore because all the drugs are primary suspects now. So we'll be completely removing this column. So now if we look at the drug file, yeah, the column's gone now. And there's a lot less drugs in this file. I will first combine the demo file with the drug file, linking them with the same primary IDs, and then storing that into the demo drug object. So that's all done in this code. So if I run that, we have demo drug here. Okay, so if we then look at this data now, so we can see the combined data sets and we can now see what drug each of these patients have been taking. Hopefully that is more information to minimize over duplication so we don't accidentally delete one of two different people. Then I will join the reaction file with what is inside the demo drug object to then create an object called combined. So that is this code here. So the reaction file has over 1 million observations, and that is because one case ID experiences multiple adverse effects. So this left join still keeps all these as long as the matching primary ID also belongs in the demo drug dataset. So I will run this. So now we have this combined data set. So once all these three files are combined, I will finally remove duplicates by finding any matching rows and putting all of them into this object called combined clean. And I think this is as accurate as we can get. And please let me know if you know any other ways or if there are any suggestions or even questions. Now we can start looking at the data. The first code counts how many times each side effect appears in the dataset and only shows the top 10. So I will run that. So that's the table that we get. I will then use ggplot to plot a bar graph for easier visualization. So I will run this. So as you can see, there's off-label use, drug ineffective and product dose omission issue among those adverse effects. So I am going to remove those 3 because these are not directly related to adverse effects per se. So drug ineffective obviously means that the drug just didn't work. Off-label use, it means that the medication was prescribed with an unapproved purpose. So for example, a drug normally used to treat hypertension was used to treat migraine. The last one, product dose omission issue, just means that the dose taken or administered was wrong. So, like too much or too little. But because these are not directly an adverse effect, so I'm just going to remove those just in this video. So that is done in this code here, where I filter out those 3. So I will just remove them entirely from combined clean object because I will not be using those at all just for the purpose of this video. So now if I go back up, rerun this code, and the ggplot code, that looks a lot better. Fatigue is a very common side effect anyway, and depending on the person, but generally it is not considered to be serious. Nausea is also very common when taking drugs. When I was in pharmacy school, I just remember that most drugs had the side effects of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Obviously, death is the most serious out of any other side effects, and by looking at this graph, it may seem like a lot of drugs may be causing death. But this is really important to remember. But the FAERS data is submitted voluntarily, so it means anyone can submit at any time. So this graph alone does not mean at all that death is more common than diarrhea or headache in general. That's not the case at all. It just means that more people submit it to the FDA when a drug presumably caused death. I know that nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea in general is far, far more common than death. And that is a fact. Because like if you think about it, if I was a doctor and saw someone tired, I would just be like, oh well, like that's pretty common. If someone died from a drug though, it's a lot more serious. I would be like, oh my gosh, I need to report this so people are aware of it. So my message here is that please just remember that this FAERS report is submitted voluntarily and has a huge reporting bias. Okay, so now that I have warned you, let's look into the data more. Let's look into the most commonly reported adverse effect of fatigue. I'll just make the graph bigger. So this code here, this code finds any row with the term fatigue, then counts the drugs in that row and extracts only the top 10 most commonly reported drug. So let's run this code. And also I will run this code. So notice here that I use the active ingredient, so the generic name instead of the brand name. So like see here, the column drug name has the brand name and product active ingredient. That's the generic name of the drug. I wasn't sure whether it's better to analyze using the brand name or the generic name of the drug because the brand name often has generic name entered instead. And the generic name has a lot of missing values as well. So actually before I started taking this video, I looked at the data using both. And I decided to use the generic drug name. So that's the active ingredient because both showed almost identical results anyways, and in terms of the order of the drugs. So I could have looked into fixing the missing values more, but I don't get paid to do all this, and I think this is just good enough for education purpose. So I'm just going to leave it as is. So if I look at the graph, these three, the top 3 drugs, they're all antibodies. So I find it interesting how antibodies are the top 3 drugs that causes fatigue. It could be because of the defense mechanism of the body, how the body fights off foreign objects. And that's how fatigue is caused. So when you get a fever, that's your body trying to fight off any bacteria or virus. But it could also just be mistaken with existing symptoms rather than fatigue being caused by the drug alone. Or because these drugs may be very common, so then more people report it. So to see if the drugs are reported disproportionately, we can use the reporting odds ratio. So I will show you the reporting odds ratio a bit later in this video, because before I get into it, I want to analyze the other adverse effect of death a little bit more. So I use the same code as before, same one that I used for fatigue, except this part is now death. So I will run this code. I will visualize this using ggplot. So this drug, dapagliflozin, it has a significant number of deaths reported. So that's almost double of the second one. So this first drug, it's a drug used to treat type 2 diabetes, which is a very common medical condition. Its most common side effects are yeast infections and UTI, so urinary tract infections. So the risk of death actually, from taking this drug is really low. So this result, again, is likely due to how often, how widely this medication is used. So, more use, more report, therefore also more death reports. This is a huge reporting bias again. There's also a chance that this report was just a mistake, because type 2 diabetes often coexists with other medical conditions, for example a heart disease. So someone's death could actually be caused by maybe a heart attack in reality, but because the person is taking this drug, maybe they thought, oh, this person's death is caused by the drug, by mistake. Or I could also think of someone, just reporting just in case, because it is another possible culprit of death. So because this drug is also significantly reported more than the other drugs, I will use the reporting odds ratio. So the definition of the reporting odds ratio, it measures how strongly an adverse drug event is associated with a specific medication compared to all other medications. It calculates the odds of a specific adverse event occurring with a target drug against the odds of that same event occurring with all other drugs in the system. So basically it checks if the proportion of a specific side effect for, say, drug A is higher than the proportion of that same side effect for all other drugs combined. So instead of looking at the raw counts of reports. I hope that makes sense. What I'm doing today is just a basic reporting odds ratio. But if you are taking into consideration the patient's, for example, the patient's age, sex, and other drugs that the patient is taking, etc., you would probably use an adjusted reporting odds ratio. So you would use something like a logistic regression model to remove all that noise. But I'm not going into that much detail today. So the reporting odds ratio is found using A, B, C, and D, which are these. And if I make that into a table, it looks like this. And that's the formula to work out reporting odds ratio. So here in the first example, I will show you how I did that with the drug that caused fatigue. I will go back one. Yeah, here we go. The first one. Dupilumab. So to work out A, B, C, and D, I use these codes. So for A, it is the target drug, so dupilumab, plus the adverse event. So in this code, I'm just counting how many rows have the drug and the adverse effect. So that's pretty easy. That's just 392 in the combined clean object. So I'll do the same for B, C, and D, except for B, it's the drug plus other side effects. So if you look here, so adverse effect is not fatigue. So that's 24,472. Okay, and C is other drugs plus fatigue. And D is other drugs and not fatigue. So the PVDA package, if I go to the top, I've added library brackets PVDA. So this package uses ROR. That simply just calculates the odds ratio, the reporting odds ratio for us, rather than manually calculating it. So for this one, so the odds ratio is 0.391 with the confidence interval of 0.354 and 0.433. So this means compared to other drugs, fatigue in dupilumab is reported less in proportion because it's less than 1. So 1 would mean that it's reported around about the same percentage as other drugs reporting fatigue. So dupilumab is reported less in proportion, with the result being statistically significant. Okay, so we will look at dapagliflozin, which is in the other graph. Here we go, that's the top one that caused death. So I reassign A, B, C, and D again, except I've changed the drug name and the adverse effect. So A, C, and D. And I will run ROR again. So the odds ratio of 8.12, that is well above the null value of 1. Like, that is an 8-fold increase in the odds of death being reported in dapagliflozin. The entire range is strictly greater than 1, so that's confirming that this is highly statistically significant. And also, the confidence interval is really narrow, so it's 7.51 and 8.78. Well, meaning that it's pretty precise, probably because of a very large number of cases. This is still a really good example of how the FAERS dataset can be biased, because like I said before, the risk of death in dapagliflozin is very, very low. Also, again, the drug is prescribed especially for those with advanced coexisting heart conditions. So there's a huge bias, and we can't just simply conclude that dapagliflozin causes death more. Also, I just wanted to show you this last code. This is part of, if I go back up, this is part of EPR package. So I will show you an example. It shows a lot more than just the reporting odds ratio. But yeah, this is just another way of finding the odds ratio. It's right here. So I won't go any further for this video, but if you are really curious, you could definitely look into this analysis further. For example, you could compare this result with other anti-diabetic drugs to partially adjust baseline mortality risk of diabetes. Or you could look into other reported adverse effects of dapagliflozin simply. Or you could even look at the patient's age, for example, or look into other drugs that they're taking as well. But there's so many ways if you want to play around with the data set. But I will be ending my FAERS analysis video here because I'm just doing this as a hobby and I think I want to move on to creating videos on other data sets. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.